Hello, hello, I am back after doing a little bit more work on the page. You can see we've got backgrounds now, and I've finished up the inking process. And I thought I'd go into a little detail about colour. So, the first thing I tend to do, once I've got my finished inks, which you can see are there, is I go back up to panel, the panel layer. For those who don't know, I put all of my panels on one layer. Then I copy the whole thing, paste it, and merge it with my inks. So now if I get rid of that, whole thing goes away. And the reason for this is that then closes up all the gaps around here, in this area here, and makes it easy to block fill. I've got all the colours I use for the main characters in my swatches. Other characters I tend to either, if they're new, make them up as I go, or if they're an old character, I'll open up the page where they were last featured and steal the colours from there. Having them all in a swatches list does tend to make it fairly easy to quite quickly go through and fill it all up. So let's quickly go through and do Crusader. All I'm using is the Magic Wand tool, contiguous, zero tolerance. That means it will only highlight what I want. It'll only highlight white with nothing else. Contiguous means it will only select the areas that are bounded. If it was non-contiguous, it would select everything of that colour, which in this case is transparent. As you can see, I've quite quickly selected all of the Crusader shirt colour. Then I go to select, modify, expand it by 3 usually, and then go to the paint bucket tool, go down to a separate layer and fill. And because we expanded it, there is no gap in the line art. Normally if you don't expand it, it would come to here and there'd be a little bit of grey between the black of the ink and the colour. But by expanding it, you fill it out. Sometimes if you've got very thin art, that causes a little bit of breakout. Might be some here, there isn't, but sometimes if this was a little bit thinner, you might get a few pixels getting out of the line art. That usually disappears when you shrink the image back down. Oh, here we go. This is a gap, actually, that I didn't catch earlier. But I will now be able to get rid of that. And yeah, this means that colouring is really, really fast. The only thing to watch out for is when you've got gaps in your line art. So if you do have a gappy style of line art, won't work for you, but it does work for me most of the time. I've got a gap somewhere here. Where have I got a gap? I've got a gap there. There we go, that's fixed it. But even then, this is so much faster than what I see some people doing, which is to laboriously colour by hand. Some styles you kind of have to do that, but me, I am a cheat and lazy person, so I will quite happily adapt my style so that I always have closed up gaps and can always use the fill tool, because it just makes it so much faster. You would not believe. You have to make sure that you don't accidentally hit the line art, because that's a very bad thing. But it's fairly easy. And the reason I put it on a layer below is so that it doesn't interact with the line art at all. And if I want to, I can change the colours without having to fix the line art that would otherwise have been affected by it. I'm sure to most of you that is just an obvious thing that, you know, of course you do that, but I have met some people for whom it isn't obvious, so I'm spelling it out so it's really, really, really obvious as to why I do it. Oops. That's another thing about the Cintiq, which I won't keep complaining about. I just think people should know what its flaws are, because a lot of people don't talk about how great it is. It can be difficult to calibrate, so where the pen is on the screen perfectly matches up with where the cursor is on the screen. Oh, I forgot his neck there, didn't notice that. There is a calibration tool to try and fix that, but it still isn't perfect. And part of that is, for 13 inches, your body physically moves around a lot, and that will change how well the calibration is, because there's in order to fit the Wacom stuff in with the screen, there's actually a fair amount of space between the glass that you're drawing on and the screen's display crystals. It's an LCD display, so there's crystals in there somewhere. So you have a parallax effect where the cursor will always be slightly distant from the point, unless you're looking dead on. And the calibration tool is supposed to correct that error. And I would imagine, although I've not used them, on the larger screens it does fairly well, because your body does not move significantly in relative terms compared to the screen. So if you've got I think the big one they sell is 27 inches, which is about twice the size of this screen. Well, it's twice the diagonal, meaning it's 4 times the effective size. When you've got something that big, a few inches to the left and a few inches to the right aren't going to make that much relative difference in terms of parallax. However, on a 13-inch screen, there is quite a lot of difference in parallax, and so your cursor doesn't always line up as well as it should, which is something that you get used to, and it's something that I'm pretty used to, though I still occasionally mess up on. But again, it's just one of those little things that, had I known it was going to be a problem, I would have come up with a different solution than buying a Cintiq, because a poor craftsman blames his tools, but I did feel that my old Intuos was getting a bit too old, and I'd do better if I replaced it with something new. That fact has been completely overruled in my head, because my dad, who I let borrow the old Intuos, is doing absolutely stunning things with it, because he's a much better artist than I am. But I did think that buying the Cintiq would allow me to make better art, and I think it does in some ways, but I think I would have been happier and would have made a better it would have been a better use of money and time if I'd... Whoops, I realise that isn't closed. It would have been a better use of money and time to buy a much bigger, much nicer screen and a new Intuos tablet than it would have been to buy this Cintiq. Though again, I don't regret it. I just, looking back, I think, yep, that probably would have been a better solution. Especially £700, you can get an absolutely fabulous screen and a very big Intuos tablet without really compromising. The biggest Intuos tablet they sell is A3, I think, and that gets you, that goes for about 300, 400-ish pounds. Combine that with a good 27 or 32-inch monitor, 1080p, 1440p, something like that, with good color accuracy, and you're still coming in with less cost than a Cintiq, and it would be a much nicer experience, I think, anyway. Not to say that a Cintiq isn't a useful device, and I certainly think it's more useful for some people than others. Those who are coming from paper and traditional media would probably be much happier with a Cintiq than a tablet, graphics tablet. It is a much more paper-like experience. You do have to get used to the feeling of drawing on glass, which is a little weird, and I know a lot of people who that is the big hurdle for them. But for someone who learned to draw using a graphics tablet and got very used to not having their eyes where their hands are, if that makes sense, not having to look at where the hand is drawing to draw, the Cintiq is not the most sensible investment. Possibly that it's a completely unique experience to me. But, yeah, anyway. I hope while I've been talking I've been doing this correctly, otherwise that'll be a bit embarrassing. But, it uses a surprisingly large amount of brain space to talk while drawing. And to be interesting while talking and drawing, it probably takes a vast amount of brain space. I wouldn't know because I'm not interesting. Ha 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 ha. I'm being mean to any of you who are listening and enjoying themselves. I'm sorry about that. As I've been going through, I've been listening to these back as I've been working, and I am trying to be a little bit more energetic than I was to begin with, because to begin with I was extremely quiet and reticent. And I don't think that is the best way to go forward with these. So I'm just trying to be a little bit more bouncy, a little bit more interesting. As it would be nice to have you guys actually enjoying yourselves. This process is in some ways the least interesting. It goes on for not as long as you'd think. If you only have 2 characters that are throughout the whole comic, it goes by incredibly quickly, because you only have to do 8 or 10 colours. But yeah, in general, it's mostly just clicking around, expanding, and clicking again. Oops. The F key and the G key, and I've said this before, you can't see the keyboard that easily when you're using a Cintiq. F key and G key are right next to each other. G is paint bucket. I don't know why, that doesn't seem like a sensible letter to me, but it's what it is. F goes full screen, which is what it is. Who's left? Third and Hannah. Okay. Most Jade and Crusade characters are 5-color characters. Originally I tried to only use 4 colors for every character, but that does become a bit constraining as I went on, so they're now how I tend to refer to as 5-color characters. So they have 5 basic colors that make up what they are. So with Third we've got his shirt, his jacket, his skin, and then his trousers. Oops. never used the Refine Edge tool at all, ever, and meant to use it. Yes, his trousers, and then his hair. So that's 5 colours, isn't it? Ha 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 ha. Crusader is the closest to the original 4-colour palette. He's got skin, shirt, hair, trousers. 5 technically, because I usually don't fill in his shades by hand anymore, which is what I used to do. So it's effectively 5. Hannah has these little collars, which makes her a 5-colour character as well. Yeah, the one annoying thing with the swatches is that they are labelled, but you can't make the labels visible that easily. So you have to just sort of hover over them for a little while, which means if you forget where one character begins and another character ends in your swatches, you just have to sort of sit there waiting and hoping while the machine decides, oh, he probably wants to know what that says, I'd better render that, which is quite irritating. There we go. One thing I'm doing that you can't see is that I'm using a keyboard command Control D to deselect when I'm finished selecting. Oh, I forgot to put those features on there. Oh, that's another reason that I put facial features on a layer above. It makes it a lot easier to fill in a whole face like that, because there's nothing in the way. There are little errors in this colouring process, like this finger hasn't filled up. Once I've done the block fill, I go through and I fill up all those little spaces by hand. That does take a little bit of time, but it is still way faster than filling them all in by hand to begin with. These characters are all from a previous page, which I'll load up probably off screen. And I just use the colour picker for that. If you go into Paint Bucket tool and Alt, you can bring up the colour picker tool. It's also on here somewhere, but I never use it that way, so... Or it used to be on there somewhere. I use Photoshop CS5, partly because it's the only one before the Creative Cloud that's still remotely usable. Photoshop CS6 would be in some ways more useful because it has an autosave feature, but I don't own a copy of CS6, so there we are. And I will be blowed if I'm going to use the Creative Cloud and have to pay Adobe whatever it is a month. I very much hate that. It is a lot cheaper if you want to use everything. If you want to use Premiere and Photoshop and Illustrator and all of them, then it's a marvelous deal and is great. But if you're like me and you only want to use Photoshop, it's not quite so good of a deal, and I resent the idea that, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Crusader, you didn't pay this month, so all of your files are now locked. I really resent that mentality behind the Creative Cloud. But you know, if I was a budding filmmaker or something, I would want to use Premiere and After Effects and probably audio software as well. Maybe a bit of Photoshop to do the special effects, resources, all that kind of stuff. I'm thinking, yeah, £50 a month for that doesn't sound too bad. But for what I'm doing, that's just insane. And I think it's less if you want one program, but not as much less as I would like. I can fill in this pizza box. I find if you have something that is meant to be white in a computer setting, such as a webcomic, white is too white for white, because computers are just very, very bright. So I make white things slightly yellow, which is also not exactly perfect, but it does make things just a little bit less jarring compared to the rest of the stuff on the screen, because white is too white. I think I'm going to stop recording there for a little while and come back when I am shading, as I think that will be more interesting to watch. Okay, thanks very much, and I'll see you again in a short while.